Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming for our very first hybrid event for a very long time. So very excited about this. Uh, I wanted to kind of personally introduce myself and then on behalf of the ARPC and then hand it to our artists and our faculty panelists. So my name is Lily Wong. I'm the Associate Professor of jointly appointed in the Literature Department, as well as the Critical Race, Gender, and Cultural Studies Department here at AU. I also serve as the Associate Director of Faculty here at AU's Antiracist Research and Policy Center, ARPC. And so for those that don't know, the ARPC is a center where we aim to generate scholarly research, educational tools, and policy analysis geared towards dismantling racism in its many forms. We build multidisciplinary initiatives for fostering racial justice, decolonial politics, and intersectional liberation by forging relationships across AU and with external changemakers in the DC region and beyond. And so, as such, we're very proud to host this panel discussion tonight that spotlights the Pauli Murray Residency for Art and Racial Justice. A little introduction for the residency. The Pauli Murray Residency for Art and Racial Justice is a collaboration between the Antiracist Center, ARPC, with AU Studio Art MFA program and Stable Arts, and the Eaton Workshop created to support artists whose projects focuses on the intersections of race, equity, and justice. So this year, our inaugural year, we have Danielle, Abrams, and Abrams Strom here as our inaugural artists of the residency, and we're very excited to have them here today. During their spring residency, Abrams Strom will be staging an exhibit of their newest collaborative artwork in progress, which you'll see a little bit of today. We're very excited about that. Called Watermarks and Acacia Pool. And it'll be also exhibited at Stable Arts all the way till May, I believe, right? And so we're very excited to kind of have a sneak peek of that today. But tonight, what we have today is that we have the artists join our faculty panelists, and we're going to discuss kind of larger kind of stakes of their work between the relationship between artist production and the practice of decolonial and racial justice. So I'm very excited to welcome you all here. What I'm going to do first is introduce kind of briefly who we have on panel, and they are going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to see a sneak peek of the new work. All right. So first off on panel, we have our artists in residency. We have Danielle Abrams, Abrams Strom. We also have Zoe Charlton, Professor of Department of Art, of course, and then we have Sybil Williams, Director of African American and African Diaspora Studies, and Program Director for Theater and Musical Theater in the Department of Performing Arts here at AU. So I'm going to hand it off to the panelists. So Danielle, if you could say a few words about yourself, kind of explain, kind of, introduce yourself to the audience.
Here we go. I didn't stand up. I don't need to be any shorter. You can hear me all right? Okay, everybody. Hi, thank you all for coming today and for this discussion. And Mary Ellen and I have some work that's hot off the press, and we're so excited to have you be our to see the exhibition this week. You know about me, you could read about me. I'll tell you just a little bit about my relationship to the work that Mary Ellen and I have made together, which fits under a category that's called wait-ins. And wait-ins was a protest strategy used during the civil rights movement and after the civil rights movement. And it was designed to, they were primarily, enacted by Black folks that were being kept from using public beaches and waterways. And our project, in a very broad way, looks at the different aspects of segregation in public spaces and public waters, and the impact that that segregation has had on communities in current day Anacostia, current day New Orleans, and current day Boston, which is where we live. So just very briefly, as an artist working on my own, And as a human being developing in the world and becoming a citizen, I've always, looked for communities, icons, spaces, emblems, stereotypical imagery that both reflect and refract my identity, which is Black, white, European, Jewish, biracial, etc., and at the intersection of many different points. So I decided, in looking for that reflection and refraction, to go to New Orleans, Louisiana. I thought I would learn something from looking at the Creole communities, talking to Creole folks down there. But what I found instead was what were the remains of a small Black segregated beach that thrived in the 1950s and 60s. It was called Lincoln Beach. I'm not going to say too much about it because you'll learn about it in the video. But I brought this information home. I had interviewed quite a few of the survivors who in the last years of their lives of segregation, the Black segregation, and I talked to Mary Ellen about it. And Mary Ellen has, we've always shared a commitment and concern and research and our works that are dedicated to exploring, studying, and reconstructing social ideas for social, racial, and spatial justice. Now, I'm not from the South. My family, 2 generations ago is from the South. And Mary Ellen and I live in Boston, and we needed to look at our own backyard. And recreational segregation didn't only take place in the South, it takes place in the North too. It still takes place, it did and it does. And it is just as potent in the North as it was in the South, which is the primary story that we usually hear about. And so we first, I'm gonna do a little historical order. We looked at different spaces of recreational segregation in waters in the North. And Anacostia Pool here in Washington, D.C. is one of those spaces. You'll learn more about that in the video. And we also looked at Carson Beach, which is in Boston, which actually had the most recent rebellion or weighed-in protests out of all of the spaces that we explored, and that occurred in 1975. Most of these rebellions or protests or acts of integration took place in the 50s and 60s and were a direct result of the civil rights movement. We were a little delayed in Boston. And I just want to finish up by saying that the histories that forbid the mixing of multiracial bodies in water is very right for me. It's right for me in its absurdity. And when things are that absurd and speak about something that could be or semi-autobiographical, that is what becomes very fresh and potent for me to develop a counter narrative. And Mary Ellen has been a wonderful partner in strategizing about how to retell these stories and tell the story of resilience and how these communities have been impacted and how they exist and thrive today in 2022 after these histories. Thank you.
Thank you, Next up, Danielle, could you also introduce yourself a bit?
Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Danielle. First, I would really like to thank Sarah Kaplan, who invited us here and who came to a talk that we did in October and gave us a very broad philosophical view of that talk. And I would like to read you something that was inspired by Sarah Kaplan. It begins with water, the color bright blue. The surface of the water reflects the color of the sky. Bodies immersed, stretch, and float. A reduction of gravity is unleashed, taking a load off. The sound of public pools is splashing with laughter. joy from the release of weight, freedom in water, body of water, bodies in water. Water can also be tempestuous, violent, impossible to control. In 2021, over 2,000 migration and asylum seekers drowned at sea as a result of pushback from Europe, shipwrecks in the Mediterranean, and deaths at sea caused by the Atlantic slave trade are not discrete stories. These stories of violence against Black bodies and death perpetrated by the global North flow together in water across time. This is a quote from Christina Sharp. Wake, the track left on the water's surface by a ship, the disturbance caused by a body swimming or moved in water. It is the air currents behind a body in flight, a region of self-disturbed flow. Christina Sharp awakens our consciousness about the afterlives of colonialism and slavery memory lodged in bodies and in water. Neuroscience proposes that the mere sight and sound of water can induce a flood of neurochemicals that promotes wellness, increases blood flow to the brain and heart, and induces a relaxation. When humans enter the water, muscles rest. Liberation from gravity is a somatic break for the human brain. What Danielle and I are trying to do here, and I guess I should use an I statement, is just join in partnership with the many communities that we've had the amazing opportunity to work with. The people that live there, their lived experience, their work as history keepers, and of writers, and of personal archives that are held within their bodies, that uphold the rich cultural traditions of Black and Indigenous communities now imperiled by erasure. So this project joins our series of conceptual and collaborative projects with communities that examine the long-term effects of racially segregated protocols in water throughout the northern and southern United States. So I want to thank Zoe and Sybil and Lily for being here with us to discuss this project we're about to show you. But before we do that, I'd like to give the opportunity for Sybil and Zoe to introduce themselves.
We do this all the time. You can tell we work together. This is constant. So I'm Sybil Roberts Williams, and I am Program Director for African American Studies, as was said, and I'm really grateful to be here for two reasons. One, just the work of both of these artists is amazing, and I just am deeply moved every time I see it, so there is that. The other part of this, which is why I'm so excited about what's coming up and to talk about it, I'm from Anacostia. So that there is just the discussion of, and for some reason, Anacostia just keeps returning to my life as a constant. In my work just recently, ironically enough, just this past year in my work, not before, I worked there, but I never addressed Anacostia in my work until this year. And so there is that, but also because of the work of water. And I'll talk more about it perhaps later, but I was asked to do a re-rendering of The Tempest, Shakespeare's The Tempest, based on Sycorax's voice recently. And I said it in her Emergencies from Water in Bermuda. And it is this idea of how she is reclaiming her body as island, as country, as water, as breaking wave, as spirit, as voices in the water, as haunted death in the water, and confronting Prospero about all of these things that the water has meant to her. So there is that. But more than anything, I am grateful to be sharing this space with women artists committed to racial justice work and equity work in our work. That work called to me. I didn't ask for it. I literally was in Tanzania and woke up one morning and said, oh, we gotta free Mumia and stop the death penalty. Like literally, just well, and fortunately for me, I have friends who know that that's my brand of crazy. So they will just kind of go, okay, so what do we do now? And so we began creating works that traveled, and I embedded myself with the MOVE community in Philadelphia to take students there and begin to think about how do we use theater as a vehicle to do social justice work? Like, what do we do? And that praxis comes in many different forms. It comes in as theater for development, which is what I studied in Tanzania, but it can come in many different ways. And so for me, it's constantly morphing and changing. How do I speak to, for, and about my ancestors and those who remain in their wake so that they are always uplifted and honored? And to that point, I want to give breath and light to the name of Tom King. He was an enslaved African who belonged to John Hertz Fletcher, one of the founding members of this university. And I sit here and lift him up and say, thank you for your perseverance so that we can all be here. Thank you.
That's right. Ashe is right. Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe Charlton. I'm faculty in the Department of Art, specifically the MFA Studio Art program. I love to begin any kind of introduction by saying this, and I wrote it down. If minding my own business was a quiz, I would willingly fail it. I share creative learning and solidarity spaces with other folks. Therefore, the possibility of minding my own business is an improbability. I'm an artist, a facilitator of conversations between artists and communities and learners. And as an artist, I make drawings, animations, and installations. I also love to tell people that I've been here for 18 years. This is why this is significant. So AU was a chartered act of Congress in the late 1800s. And the Department of Art was kind of loosely formed in the 20s, in the 1920s. In 1943, we became an official department with our first chair. And in 2009, I became the first Black tenured faculty in the Department of Art. And in 2021, I became the first full professor, Black full professor in the Department of Art. Now I say that, that's not a case of applause. I want to say it like this. It's because with our history in being one of the first universities, PWIs, predominantly white universities in the district, to enroll African-American students, it surprises me always that I am the first Black tenured faculty in the Department of Art. When we're talking about, and today's panel is about place, and I think about place, and I think that there is trauma and joy embedded in place, in the landscape. It's also embedded in the architecture of a place, right? And so I think about those things when I come into this institution on a somewhat daily basis, when I come into the classroom and I look at the people that I am building with. And this kind of personal narrative becomes really important, especially in the way that you both are talking about spaces and places and how the impact that they have on our bodies, on our collective bodies, right? And so I'm very excited about participating on this panel.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. And I think this would be a really wonderful kind of segue into kind of placing our conversation with Danielle and Marianne's work. So this is where I'm going to hand it to Marianne and to kind of show us a little sneak peek of their new collaboration.
I want to warn everybody that this is 30 minutes, okay? So I always let people know that in terms of moving image, so you don't feel like you're being held hostage.
buildings, churches, black skin, swimming pools, poplar trees, white folk, hills, roads, buses, metro, restaurants, libraries, yoga, community, church, old people, babies, gentrifiers, long timers, new, dogs, dog parks, trees, museums, culture, blackness. For people to understand that mambo sauce and go-go music and the fairy furry merger and all of these things that we think of as being iconic DC are iconic DC because of the ways that Black people have given blackness into the landscape, and that has to be preserved. So that would be my wish, is that nobody ever forget that. You know, the sound of DC is a Black sound. And so all of the features that we associate with being DC and the kinds of things you hear east of the river, all of those things are have their roots in African American language. And the kinds of sayings that people have. My favorite example is the ER, airy to uri vowel. It's become really concentrated in DC. And I would say it has also become even more concentrated east of the river. And so the famous mayor for life, Marion Barry, he has that vowel in his name twice, Murray and Burry. It matters that that's how his name is pronounced. And so that's part of my that identity. Another big one that's very subtle, but again, people will comment on it, is that it's not southeast. If it's southeast, we have a problem. It's southeast. So you're going to be from the southeast. And so that is an in-group marker. And again, that's a feature of African American English. And it's one of the things that we often have to teach about to say, like, people who are going to be speech pathologists or things like that are like, no, you know, a young Black child is likely to read TOOTH and say tooth. Like, that's just the phonology of AAE. It doesn't mean they've read it wrong. That's just what that sound turns into. So that's a big linguistic marker as well. And another one that I'm currently doing some work with is the term white folk. But one of my interviews called it a whole paragraph in a word, because it carries all of these connotations about intent and who's supposed to belong here. And as I sometimes put it, it's like white folks are just people who are white. White folk, well, they up to something. There's that really interesting racial tension that gets captured in the terms. So.
libation, invisible, ocean gray, consequential, raindrops, smiles, floating, weightless, left, omniatic sac, tears of joy, heavy, filled, clean, separate. I'm thinking of the summer of 1919, the summer that my grandfather was born, in Chicago, where a young African-American man was stoned to death because he accidentally crossed over from the Black section of the beach to the white section of the beach. And that led to riots, and people were killed, and thousands of homes of African-Americans were burned down, all because of an incident in the water. I'm thinking of the bridge in Mississippi, the Shibuda Bridge, where lynchings of African Americans were commonplace, and just the history of placing Black bodies who had been brutalized and murdered at sources of the water, at locations where Black people went to enjoy the water and had recreation in the water. That sort of psychological warfare is going to make people fear and avoid the water. So encouraging people to swim in pools and open water, that's us speaking back to that. a long-term, long-standing fear that's been instilled in the Black community. But that recognition that those fears aren't real, they're unfounded, they're unnecessary, and the water is the space that we were meant to be in, that our ancestors used to be masters of. And so it's a part of our birthright, and I love it. I love seeing us rediscover that. What we want is for our children to aspire to more than just simply to not drown. Africans were the first people to do the freestyle stroke, and how the Senegalese fishermen, when the Portuguese tried to capture them, and I think it was 1445, how they just jumped off the boat and swam to shore, even though they were in deep waters, and it shocked the Portuguese fishermen that they were able to swim so carefree in that type of ocean. We want people to understand that this is a part of their legacy, a part of their birthright, and there were historic things that were purposefully done to separate us from the water. But that's not who we are. It's just a part of our way of life, and getting people to recognize that and get back to that is how we talk back.
And you realize, like, oh, there's quantitative differences in the actual linguistic features that are being used when people are talking about gentrification. And so this tells us something about resistance to that might not come out in just talking about it. And like, if you're just dealing with it like, okay, well, that's what they said. It's like, well, yeah, but the fact that they said it with ain't matters. Well, we need to think about how people are volunteering stories, volunteering counter narratives to push back against the kinds of things that other people are saying about the neighborhood. You know, one of the things that continues to strike me is I have a handful of interviewees whose ancestors worked the land and who were slaves on the plantation that became Hillsdale, that then eventually became Berry Farm, and so you have these houses that have been owned 4 and 5 generations. Well, you need to make sure that that stays as it is, and that you think about where things are going to be placed and who's going to have to move in order to make those things happen. You know, how do we keep people where they are? How do we value the things that they value? Berry Farm, for all of its, and here I'm speaking specifically about the housing project, for all of the ways in which the buildings fell into disrepair, as with many housing projects, it's higher crime than the surrounding areas, you know, and just had all of the problems that tend to come with that. This is one of the most beautiful places in Anacostia. Wander in and you just go, wow, there's these huge, tall, I think, poplar trees, these old growth trees and shade, and these homes that are next door to one another, and you just have this sense that you've stepped out of Washington entirely, and it's a housing project. And so you go, okay, how do you preserve those things? And you recognize those are the things you need to preserve when you're aware of those discourses that are happening.
And so I, as well as other members of the African American community in Boston, began to challenge the way that Black folks weren't allowed to walk on the beach. And so there was a conversation in the African American community, led by Tom Masters, led by myself, and led by others, U.B. Jones, and so many other folks in the African American community, said, hey, guess what? We got to do something about this situation that we find ourselves in. the impetus was Columbia Point, because the majority of the people that used to go over to Carson Beach and have conflict was the folks from Columbia Point. They lived there. It was a 1,500 unit public housing community. And I was in charge. I said, guess what? We're going to have this date, this time to go to Carson Beach. And we're going to ask the African American community of Boston to come along to essentially have a day at the beach at Carson Beach, a playful day at Carson Beach, a great day at Carson Beach. So it was a festive occasion. Folks weren't wanting to do any battles, but unfortunately, the city of Boston and folks in the state agency, meaning the state police, and they had some other agenda. And actually, the Black leadership did come out. Mel King was there leading the cause. Actually, I have so much respect for Mel King. He was physically in the water. And here comes the MDC police telling him and every other Black person to get out the water. And why were they saying that? Was because of the fact that whites over in South Boston who came to agitate, to do the same things that they did with school desegregation and busing, wanted to do the same thing with facility desegregation. They started throwing bricks and rocks at the folks that were there. And in them throwing the bricks and the rocks, the police, who had essentially cordoned off the beach, with one side being white and one side being Black, the rocks began to be thrown by people that came out from South Boston. Folks that wanted to create conflict started throwing those rocks and bricks, and all hell broke loose. But Mel King stayed in there, as I did and others did, and said, we're still gonna go to the beach and we're gonna still keep it festive. But the police department actually got in the water with buses, similar to what you would see in the Deep South, and began to beat Mel King with billy clubs, and began to beat him. And this is a strong, big dude. He's Mel, if I'm not mistaken, is about 6'3", 6'4", big guy. And we began to holler and scream at the police department, stop, stop, stop this madness. This is crazy. We are here in 1975 and we can't use a public beach. And by the way, why aren't you attacking the folks that began this stuff, began the challenge from the beginning? And that is the folks from South Boston that came out to create havoc and madness. Folks from across the city in the African American and Latino community were willing to come in large caravans. There was caravans coming from Franklin Field, Franklin Park, other parts of Dorchester and Mattapan. Folks were excited about coming. But here's the interesting part, and I think it gets lost in translation, is the fact that so many folks had come with beach gear, beach outfits. They weren't coming for a battle of Boston. They weren't coming to battle South Boston. They were actually saying, guess what? This is a public beach and we should have access. This is 1975. This is not Birmingham. This is not other parts of the South. This is a northern city that's supposed to have an opportunity to use public beaches. So I wanted to make sure that we staged it in a way that this is not a confrontation. We want to have access to this land that is public land and this beach that is a public beach. And I wanted to make sure that I staged it where folks from Columbia Point understood that the folks that are coming in from other parts of the community, including Franklin Park, Franklin Field, and other places that were in a caravan, that they would be essentially focused on making sure that there is no engagement, because we knew that the folks from, unfortunately, South Boston that were going to come out would be doing the same thing that they did during school desegregation, which was still continuing. What I saw was amazing, because most of the folks were wearing things for a beach. They were in beach gear. They had balloons, the whole 9 yards. They were ready for the beach. They weren't ready for confrontation. Folks didn't come with sticks and stones or anything else. The only thing they came with was a smile. And what they got in return was really a battle of Boston with the police department. And unfortunately, as the newspaper coverage showed, it was essentially police beating down Black folks, beating down Latinos, beating down seniors, and telling them to go home, that you don't have access to this public facility. It was painful. It was not right. I stayed as long as I could, along with other folks in the African-American community, particularly the people from South Boston. And it was a tough time. It was an amazingly tough time for Boston. The moral of the story is this, is that the folks from South Boston have been used for years. Like the folks from Roxbury have been used for years. In Columbia Point, in Dorchester, in Mattapan, everybody fighting against each other. And then they have a common enemy, and that's the system that causes this pain for each and every last one of them. So I've never, ever been concerned about talking to folks and going into South Boston, or any other part of Boston, because that's what we need to do. Come together. That's what it's all about. Here we are in 1975, and now here we are in 2022. Everything has changed and nothing has changed. As we see voting rights and voting opportunities being drawn back, as well, is the same thing going to happen where we limit the ability of African Americans and other people of color to actually have access not just to voting, but access to physical space, access to opportunity? Everything has changed and nothing has changed. We see the rollback going back to the 1950s and 60s and even the 1970s. I say be cautious, be focused, be relentless in protecting our rights.
I watched 17 episodes of Mad Men. I was stalking Salvatore Romano, a Madison Avenue art director. He smokes, has well-mic'd ice cubes tinkling in his cocktail, and just like all the other male characters on the show, he cheats on his wife, although with men. Mad Men takes place in 1960. That was 4 years before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. White-collar workers were white, and secretaries were called sweethearts and served the coffee. And the ad men led duplicitous lives that were kept orderly by their wives who were in servitude. The real-life Salvatore Romano is Brian Batt. He's an actor, but also the co-owner of Hazelnut, fine handsome home furnishings. In New Orleans, Louisiana, they sell high-end tchotchkes with a Cajun flair. Brian Batt is also the grandson of Harry Batt, the owner of New Orleans' notorious Pontchartrain Beach, a lakeside amusement park that was racially segregated from 1928 to 1964. Here's Harry Batt with Elvis Presley. There was an innovation in engineering called the screw pump, and it dredged Lake Pontchartrain of its swamp. 50 acres of new pristine lakefront were devoted to Pontchartrain Beach. New Deal investments opened up for new white homeowners. Blacks were kept far away from Pontchartrain Beach and the renovated lakefront. As you see in this picture of Pontchartrain Beach, there are no Black people. Just in time for New Orleans' 300-year anniversary, Brian Batt wrote this book to commemorate his family's amusement park accomplishments. Its title is Pontchartrain Beach, a family affair, and it pays tribute to all the white families that patronized his family's beach. Now, Batt fails to mention that Blacks were not allowed at Pontchartrain Beach. Their options were to swim in eroded and hazardous sections of the lake that were ruined by those screw pump upgrades. When attempting to swim, if they survived, they either faced white violence or police harassment. After 26 years of pressure from the NAACP and the New Orleans Urban League, the city did finally decide to build a beach for African Americans. There was an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a diving pool, a midway with rides, a restaurant, and paramount Black musicians. It was called Lincoln Beach, and it was open for 10 years, from 1954 to 1964. It was 15 acres compared to Pontchartrain Beach's 50 acres, and pushed out as far as possible from the main lakefront and from any public transportation. When I spoke with the elders who made their way to Lincoln Beach in the 1950s, they all expressed a similar sentiment. I felt safe there. Mr. Leon Waters, a New Orleans activist, griot, historian, and also a former Lincoln Beach patron, surmised the fell acreage that Lincoln Beach is today. He turned to me and said, "They let that forest grow, so we'd forget that ever happened." Evo, Loop, Yobab, Derelak, Noitagurgis, Seder, Retza Okrel, Nair Troktana, N-word, Tigra. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Big Easy. It's a very special day here today because, as you know, the Civil Rights Act has passed. That's right, and we're having a good old integration day here in Pontchartrain Beach. Ooh, you should see the Negroes, they're just flooding on over. They can't wait to get there, ride on that great big roller coaster, the Zephyr. Y'all know that one, right? Well, it may be a little tricky to have them mixing with the white folks here, but how could they deny the allure of what had always been forbidden and better than what they ever had? Oh, yes. Well, I will tell you, they're not exactly being welcomed here with open arms. Harry that low. Alonso, see if you can get that with your camera. He's covered the entire park with fencing. That's right, fencing. He says he's going to keep out the thugs. And he's changed his ticket policy now. One ticket, one ride, and he's adding on a gate fee. Well, he does have a few Negroes working for him, but they're not getting paid the same wages as well. Nonetheless, we are having an integration day, and let me tell you something. If you're listening out there and you're colored and you want to come to Pontchartrain Beach, it is your right. It's the new law. So gather up your friends, gather up your family, gather up your neighbors, your whole neighborhood, and come. Please come. You better watch your ass. See, once blacks joined the crowds at Pontchartrain Beach, whites receded. They returned to their private pools and their beach clubs. And Pontchartrain Beach, which was once all white, now looks like Lincoln Beach, all black. Well, with an all black hatred, Harry Bat let Pontchartrain Beach fall into ruin. Right down the road, Lincoln Beach. It was in existence for 10 years, anointed by black people. And it never had a damn thing to do with bettering the race relations.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Mary Ellen and Danielle to say a few words.
Well, what I'm really interested in is hearing from Sybil and Zoe. So would you like to say anything, Danielle?
I don't have much to say, but I'm glad y'all are here.
Every time I see this piece, excerpt of this collaboration, I am at a loss for words because I still see recreational spaces that bear the legacy of segregation. And it makes me think about two things: the legacies of segregation and what it means to have a maroon space, right? So deliberately separate space. And so I think right now in my own life, those polarities are very, very important to the way that I navigate around landscapes and feel safe. And I think that the line that the elder said in this work is so important. We felt safe in this place. And I think that that's so important here. So yeah, I think about those two ideas. And a few years ago, I was at a conference, not that I vacationed this place, but I was at Martha's Vineyard, and everybody said, you should go to Oak Bluff. And I was like, well, what's Oak Bluff? And when I went there, it was like HBCU heaven. And suddenly I was like, oh, this is where my people are. So it was amazing to see that kind of space within another kind of space. And I remember Catholics were saying, yeah, we feel safe here. And so I thought that was a really kind of interesting, all this language that comes around or is used around notions of safety.
I want to continue that. I think that idea of maroon space is something that is really intriguing to me too. As I was watching, Zoe and I were meaning to be impolite, as I saw your piece, particularly around the Pontchartrain Beach, there are two beaches here. There's one in Annapolis called Highland Beach. And Highland Beach was the spot in Annapolis where African Americans from the DC area could go that wasn't segregated. So all of the well-to-do families from Upper 16th Street, which had a legacy of people like Jean Toomer and all those families, they all had surgeons from Howard University Hospital, professors from Howard University Hospital, all had houses at Highland Beach. Frederick Douglass had a house at Highland Beach. And so my friend's family had a house at Highland Beach. And I went as an adult, I didn't know anything about this legacy of a Highland Beach. And it was such a source of pride. And it was a source, all the families knew each other. And right down to like second and third generation of kids, they all knew each other. And it was now reduced from acres, miles of beach to maybe 2 communities, like 2 blocks of communities. And they were fighting to hold on to their homes because literally they're being gentrified and their little cottages were being torn down. And these huge these families were building these huge white beach structures all around them. So it humbled me, but it also enrages me that they can't hold on. Like, this is a community that their legacy was passing. They were even attempting in their town hall to get a documentary made. They were attempting to maintain interviews, and my friend who had her house ultimately passed. So these kinds of connections from Anacostia to Highland Beach are very real for me because I've watched people who fled Anacostia, who fled segregated areas of Northwest and went to Highland Beach, which is where they could belong. And you think about that. The other thing, I was in American Beach in Florida, the similar thing where there was an all-Black beach community for well-to-do. I mean, Johnetta Cole's family was from American Beach, and they literally built this resort town because they couldn't go anywhere else in Florida. And now there's like a huge Marriott or something, and it's like they are running them off. And we were there, and my husband and I just walking around, going, "Wow!" You feel the history, you feel its grandeur. You stand in what was left of a bandstand on a wood floor, and you hear Fats Domino. You hear Etta James. You see the Coca-Colas being served. These are things you know in your heart and you remember, and it's leaving, it's going. I mean, it's pretty much gone. And when people walk by my husband and I, because you're African Americans, normally they see white people coming to walk around to see what they can buy next. And so it was me and my husband and like, "Hi, how are you? Like, please, and it's heartbreaking when you think of the struggle that went into that. When you think about the families that went to Highland Beach, when you think about them, that one of them was the surgeon who performed the first open heart surgery. His family had a house in Highland Beach that they can't hold on to. Those things matter. So I think about maroon spaces, I think about fugitivity. I think about being a fugitive in those spaces, but I mostly think about healing. that I come in and I can stand on those wooden floors and I can walk those beaches and I can hold on to that history in my own body for that moment. And I can be very grateful that people thought enough of themselves, not simply to resist whiteness, but to build a space that was there so they didn't have to constantly resist whiteness and they could heal in that space. So this film, it just brought up so much for me because I've been in those spaces. And oh my God. So.
I just want to add one thing. Thank you for ending in that way. It's often when bodies like ours, when Black bodies are in spaces, they are defined as sites of resistance. And so how do our bodies, how does my Black body not exist or be a marker of a site of resistance, but a site for joy, right? A site for healing, a site for the imaginary, right? My own imaginary. And so that's really important. Yeah.
A site of memory. I remember.
Thank you so much for what you have both said, and joy, reconciliation, making narrative from the past rather than having just nostalgia or just bitterness. That's been a serious consideration of mine from the beginning. And to talk about those sacred spaces, that's right, you can own that bandstand, you can own that weedy lot, you can feel those currents, the water carries them. And I'm thinking a lot about a man who I met, a young man, an activist named Sage Michael Pellet in New Orleans, who essentially, grassroots effort, gathered up a few friends from New Orleans East, which is where Lincoln Beach was, and started to just clean up the beach. Because at that point, there were lots of folks that were without homes, that were sleeping on the beach. There was litter, just everything was contaminated and dirty. And by himself, without a penny from New Orleans, just donations from mostly Black folks. He got beds, he got gardening equipment, things that would make the beach usable. Until this day, that beach cannot be reopened. And Michael is very clear, this beach is for everybody. This is for us to remember the Black legacy, but it is open to everybody. And it is usable. The water quality is fine. He has done everything on his own to reopen that beach. And the city refuses to put the funding towards making that a public space. It was much more beneficial for New Orleans to have Lincoln Beach open, to keep Blacks from even desiring to go to the white beach, and also to keep them from protesting, from getting involved in civil rights protests that were going on in downtown New Orleans near Bourbon Street, the major vacation district. So I just wanted to point out Sage Michael because he is a young man, he's younger than me, and he's a barber who decided to stop cutting hair and instead start trimming the beach.
Thanks, Danielle, and thank you, Zoe and Sybil. One of the threads that has gone through this study that Danielle and I have embarked on for the last 2 years is what you bring up, is the legacy of segregation and then neighborhoods after enforced desegregation becoming gentrified, like mentioning Highland Beach and American Beach. And that's something that we had the opportunity to speak with Jenny Greiser about at length, and how to not allow that erasure to happen. And I'm from Montana, so I have the amazing opportunity to work with many Indigenous scholars right now. And we're doing 4 public art projects in Yellowstone Park next summer that are about reclaiming Indigenous histories. But currently they're refusing the term decoloniality, and they are, it refers to what both of you are saying. They are just making sure to only say indigenizing. And Jesse Greiser had that attitude, which you're both talking about as well. That was incredibly inspiring, but having deep commitments to hold on to those histories and to refuse an erasure. Thank you.
I just wanted to, hello, I just wanted to add one more thing. You know, when I first started studying the social space of the beach and the amusement park, a lot of the historians who wrote about those spaces and cultural anthropologists had a very kind of candy-coated attitude, so to speak, about the space, which was that this was a shared social space where you could be of any race or ethnicity, because while experiencing the pleasure of sucking on a clam or under the colored lights or on the rides, people became colorblind. That was America's first narrative, to erase the real pain and dehumanization of segregation that was actually taking place at Coney Island, in Chicago, in Florida, in New Orleans, in Boston, so on and so forth. So I guess I'm thinking about that whole idea of looking at things from a decolonial perspective or a colorblind perspective, and actually rooting ourselves in the sand, in the water.
On that note, actually, in terms of rooting ourselves in this conversation, I would like to kind of invite the audience in for some kind of questions to see if we could have conversations rooted in our place here in the present. Also online, as well as we have online chats coming in as well. So I'm going to hold a little space to see if anyone has any questions to ask our fellow panelists, either artists or faculty as well. I think we have a few questions from the online community first.
Anyone have a question? Just raise your hand and I'll walk over the mic to you.
I'd even like to hear some of your own reflections about beaches and pools that you might have frequented or heard about your family or ancestors frequenting. I think we have to start to air these stories. Please. There's a hand up there.
Hi there, my name's Lydia. I come from a small eastern North Carolina town right on the Outer Banks. My family's not been there for very long, but most of my close friends, it's a very generational community as well. A predominantly white area, but there is the history of race within the community. We live next, or the town I live in is next to a sundown town. Or formerly a sundown town. So there are spaces that houses have now been built onto that were segregated beaches. And I remember not knowing about that and that not being publicized thing within our community until about the last 3 years. And the shock that kind of rippled throughout the community from that, and the erasure within our community of those stories, with buildings being completely removed. We had a train tracks that ran through the town originally that created a line, and that line is now trying to be blurred with gentrification. But there are people within our community, thankfully, that have stepped up to try and hold on to the history that's within our community. But I taught swim lessons and sailing lessons in my community when I was in high school. And one of the main things that was brought up in that was if we can bring communities that hadn't been in those sports originally, which those sports are predominantly white in my community. And so in order to do that, we realized that there was an issue of lack of ability to bring people in. And so there was a movement within that of how can you bring in these, like the Black community into these spaces that they were not been originally welcomed. And so I'm hopeful for that in the future. There's been push for that as much as possible. We had the Boys and Girls Club, which is a predominantly Black organization within our community also. We would bus people over so that we could have the kids within that. And it was great to see them also integrated in. So thank you for all your work also. This is amazing to see.
Sharing that experience. I mean, I think that's kind of the key here, to talk about that history and to not, as you say, gentrify it, cover the railroad tracks. Let's talk about what actually happened here.
Yeah, Lydia, thank you so much. It just makes me think about the kind of grammar of geology and the grammar that we use to talk about even transportation and divisions of space, right? I live in Baltimore. Baltimore is the home of redlining. The neighborhood that's north of where I live is the home of redlining. But what I think is so interesting about your acknowledgement and your community's acknowledgement and how people get around in those spaces is that reminder, even if sites are removed, even if the name of the street changes or the neighborhood changes, the fact that folks, using folks this time, folks need to be transported in, that's a part of that legacy, right? That's the reminder. And I think that becomes really curious. So anytime I go into towns, I'm a nut. Like when I'm riding around or I'm a passenger, I look and see the history of a town and I'm like, oh, that was a sundown town. What are the markers of that, right, within the space? And so I find that really important and curious as a way to understand how to navigate through that space. And even when I'm traveling with allies, they start to understand how they too need to navigate through that space, especially when they're in those places with me. Recently, I traveled going south to Farmville, Virginia. And in Farmville, Virginia is a community named Israel Hill, or was a community named Israel Hill. That was actually, I think it was the community that was built by a nephew of Thomas Jefferson's wife, but it's this convoluted story. But the interesting thing is that within that tiny community, within the town of Farmville, within the state of Virginia, there is this oasis in which Black, Indigenous, and white folks lived apparently harmoniously. They made the same living wage. They were everybody went, the court systems were fair to everyone. So there was this kind of like oasis within that community. And there are markers of that still within Farmville, right? And I saw that within the university system, in the way that the city was laid out. So those kinds of things, that we get those reminders in space. I also wanted to say, to just acknowledge that you said indigenizing as opposed to decolonizing. That framework, just that is a simple word substitution that has long range conceptual right results. And so that's pretty amazing. So I'm excited to hear that. Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to something Zoe said. In addition to those markers that are on the land, there are markers in people's bodies. And remembering that when you have to bring those young people in, they have generational memory. There are cellular memories of, wow, you have to take transportation to get here. A side note, My mother's from South Carolina. She's from a little town right outside of Myrtle Beach. And for years, I was like, Myrtle Beach is great. I was like, no, it isn't. And I didn't quite understand that I had absorbed all her sentiments about Myrtle Beach. They could only go to Atlantic Beach, which was the Black beach. And there was an invisible dividing line in the water. Like you couldn't cross the water in a certain place. So Myrtle Beach was here for the whites. Atlantic Beach was there for African Americans. And now that's called North Myrtle Beach. Atlantic Beach is North Myrtle Beach. And it is gentrifying rapidly. And to this day, my mother is like, you won't catch me setting foot on Myrtle Beach. Because my mother could only go there when she worked weekends for her white family. And she couldn't bring us. So body memories are there. My body has that memory about Myrtle Beach. So when I went, people were like, this is great. I was like, can we go now? You know, it's there. So it stays there.
Thank you, Sybil, for talking about that and the way that memory is located in our bodies, and in the land and in the water, and just developing, kind of always a consciousness about our own subjectivity and how someone might experience something in their body differently than someone else in places where beauty masks history, and where kind of the smell of the ocean air or the lap of the wind on our forehead can really mask some violence, especially in places that should be locations of healing. And what are things we can all do to really think about that healing? And something that this was a work in progress, something that was a mistake, is that I don't think the title for Ebony Rosemond, who directs Black Kids Swim, was up there. She was the second woman who, what she does is she works with Black youth to have them be competitive swimmers and to compete on national and international levels. So it's, as she said, it's not about teaching young people not to drown, but to aspire to becoming great swimmers. And currently she's at Gorée Island in Senegal, kind of doing a swim that I had the opportunity to witness once, from Gorée Island to Dakar. And she's an amazing force in Washington, D.C. If anybody ever gets the chance to speak with her, she's also an incredible repository of history about water and the legacies internationally. Thank you.
Something that I'm also just very excited about with Watermark is the way that y'all have woven the individual narrative with the collective narrative at the same time that you are making a space for fictions to reside. And I think that that's so curious. And I was thinking about your piece, and I want to get the title, Stand by Snow. And they were talking about, and when Rachel Tang referenced Peter Nabokov and another person I can't remember, Edward Proctor Hunt, and Edward Proctor Hunt is no longer in the Okomo Nation, which I thought was really interesting. But what came up in connection with Watermark is that what does it mean when someone interior to a particular community tells their own story versus someone else telling the story for them, right? And there are gestures and actions that change the focus, right? And you could call them colonizing gestures, etc. which is what which the delivery of Rachel was pretty profound, and it was just so flat, and I thought, I need to find out who this is. So that was a rabbit hole. But I thought that was really curious, and so one of the power of your collaboration is that people are telling their own story, their family stories around these spaces. And then that becomes the narrative, that becomes the history, that becomes the archive and the theoretical framework that's coming out of bodies, right?
It's a decolonizing work of memory. Yeah. And I think we don't invest enough in memory and decoloniality. So much of that work, so much of the work of decolonizing has to come through memory, which exists in various narratives, in various forms, and in our bodies, and comes out in various forms, gestures, movements, etc. But that how does one decolonize memory? How do you do the decolonizing work of memory? That to me is fascinating, and that's where and Stand by Snow was definitely one because of the issues of representation and visual culture. That visual culture can work to alter our memories and such profound to alter history and then alter our own truths and what we actually remember so profoundly that it's like, how do we do the decolonizing work of memory in the midst of this onslaught of change and revision and erasure? So that was interesting for me.
Thank you. I would like to hold more space for Danielle and Marielle to have the very last words to conclude this. And yeah, please.
I just really want to say my deep appreciation for all of you for witnessing this. This is the first time we have shown it. It's still a work in progress right now. So it's always a gift to experience something publicly as an artist for the first time. It's just filled with learning. And so thank you for your patience with us. And I really am grateful for your presence.
Well, thank you all for being here. I mean, it really means a lot to have you as our first audience. But I also want to very much thank the Antiracist Research and Policy Center for hosting us so beautifully in the Studio Art program at American University. Amazing graduate students. Jalen Soar is in the back. Yes, and Zoe Charlton and Tim Dowd, who's been a wonderful host as well. And thank you, Sybil. And also I want to echo how wonderful Sarah Kaplan has been when we came in October as part of the residency. And the Pauli Murray Residency is just, I mean, talk about indigenizing a space to, you know, to just mark the Eaton Hotel with the Pauli Murray Residency and all of the Black art and music and culture that's being generated there. It's just an incredible honor to be part of this whole experience. And thank you so much, Lily, for having us and picking up where Sarah left off. It was a really wonderful experience.
Thank you so much for our wonderful artists and panelists today to have this conversation. Thank you all for being here for our first hybrid event in forever, ever. This is our very first hybrid event. So thank you so much for being in conversation. Please do come and meet the artists and the panelists. And do catch your exhibit that is here in DC all the way till May 14th. So please don't miss it. Thank you so much and good night.
Performance, okay, it's 7 o'clock on Thursday. I have a brand new performance that is about my father's memory of swimming. So I hope you can come and see it. We're gonna have a panel, an amazing panel with leaders from the Anacostia area. Kenneth Carroll will be there. Leon Rock, who you saw speaking about Carson Beach, who's now a Maryland resident, and Gail Shaw Clemens, who's a local artist from Stable. Am I leaving anybody out, Marielle? I think I got everybody.
No, but the opening is at 6. It's this Thursday, March 24th at 6 p.m. So please come.
Stable, okay? Hope to see you.
Thank you, everyone.